Have you ever noticed how the most intelligent people you know often prefer to be alone? Not because they're antisocial, not because they can't connect with others, but because they've discovered something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. They've realized that solitude isn't loneliness, it's freedom. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's most penetrating philosophers, understood this better than almost anyone. He spent most of his life deliberately choosing solitude over society. And from that choice came insights about human intelligence, creativity, and the nature of consciousness that are still shocking people today. But here's what makes Schopenhauer's approach to solitude truly terrifying to most people. He didn't retreat from the world because he was damaged or antisocial. He withdrew because he was intelligent enough to see through the illusions that keep most people desperately clinging to social validation, group thinking, and the exhausting performance of fitting in. Today, we're going to explore something that might make you deeply uncomfortable. Schopenhauer discovered that the people who choose to be alone aren't running away from intelligence. They're running toward it. While everyone else is busy conforming, compromising, and dulling their minds through constant social noise, the truly intelligent are doing something far more radical. They're thinking. What I'm about to share with you isn't a celebration of antisocial behavior or an excuse for isolation. This is about understanding why some of the most brilliant minds in history have consistently chosen solitude as the foundation for their greatest achievements, and why this choice reveals a form of intelligence that most people never develop. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." But what he really meant was something far more profound. The moment you need other people to tell you who you are, what to think, or how to feel, you've surrendered the very thing that makes human consciousness extraordinary: your ability to think independently. If you want to understand the relationship between solitude and intellectual development, and why choosing to be alone might be a sign of intelligence rather than weakness, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We explore the philosophical insights that reveal hidden truths about human nature and potential. The people who choose solitude haven't given up on humanity. They've simply realized that most of what passes for human connection is actually sophisticated forms of mutual manipulation, intellectual conformity, and emotional dependency that prevents real thinking, real creativity, and real growth from ever happening. This isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting all social connection. This is about understanding why the highest forms of human intelligence often require the courage to be profoundly alone. First insight. Schopenhauer understood that intelligent people choose solitude because they've recognized what he called the will of the masses as a form of intellectual suicide. Most people don't realize how much of their thinking isn't actually their own. Their opinions, preferences, values, even their emotional reactions are largely shaped by the groups they belong to, the media they consume, the social pressures they're constantly navigating. But truly intelligent people have a terrifying realization. The moment you're in a group, even a group of two, you're no longer thinking with your full intellectual capacity. You're thinking with part of your mind, while another part is constantly monitoring social dynamics, managing impressions, avoiding conflict, seeking approval, or maintaining harmony. This isn't conscious, it's automatic. The human brain has evolved sophisticated mechanisms for social cohesion that literally alter your cognitive processes when other people are present. You become less creative, less original, less willing to pursue uncomfortable truths, less capable of sustained deep thinking. Schopenhauer realized that most people never experience their own intelligence because they're never truly alone with their thoughts. They move from family interactions to work relationships, to social gatherings, to entertainment, constantly surrounded by other people's voices, opinions, expectations, and energy. The intelligent person who chooses solitude has made a radical decision. They've decided that access to their own mind is more valuable than social approval. They've realized that their best ideas, their deepest insights, their most creative solutions come not from brainstorming with others, but from the quiet depths of sustained solitary thinking. This doesn't mean they can't collaborate or enjoy social connection. It means they understand the difference between choosing to engage with others from a place of inner fullness versus needing others to feel intellectually or emotionally complete. Watch how truly intelligent people handle group conversations. They often seem slightly detached, not because they don't care, but because part of their mind is always observing the social dynamics, noting how group thinking emerges, watching how individual intelligence gets compromised by collective pressure. They've learned that the price of belonging to most groups is intellectual conformity, and they've decided that price is too high to pay. Second insight. They've discovered what Schopenhauer called the art of being alone without being lonely, which requires a level of inner development that most people never attempt. There's a profound difference between someone who is alone because they can't connect with others, and someone who chooses to be alone because they've developed the capacity for rich internal experience. Schopenhauer spent decades developing what he called the world as representation, the ability to create entire universes of thought, imagination, and insight within his own consciousness. He didn't need external entertainment or constant social stimulation because he had learned to find infinite fascination in the workings of his own mind. This terrifies people who have never developed inner richness. They can't imagine being alone for extended periods because when they're alone, they're bored, anxious, or depressed. They've never learned to enjoy their own company because they've never developed their inner world to the point where solitude becomes a luxury rather than a punishment. But intelligent people who choose solitude have made a different discovery. They've realized that their own consciousness, properly developed, is more interesting than most social interactions, more entertaining than most media, more rewarding than most group activities. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires what Schopenhauer called the cultivation of mind. Reading deeply, thinking systematically, developing aesthetic appreciation, exploring philosophical questions, creating meaningful work. They've turned their inner world into something so rich and engaging that solitude feels like coming home rather than being banished. They can spend hours alone without feeling lonely because they're not actually alone. They're in conversation with the greatest minds in history through books. They're exploring ideas that most people never encounter. They're working on projects that emerge from their deepest interests rather than external obligations. The person who chooses solitude from this place of inner richness appears mysterious, even threatening, to people who can't imagine being alone without feeling empty. Their contentment in solitude challenges the assumption that human happiness requires constant social validation and external stimulation. Third insight. Schopenhauer recognized that intelligent, solitary people develop what he called intellectual independence, the ability to think thoughts that have never been thought before because they're not constantly checking their ideas against group consensus. Most breakthrough insights in science, philosophy, art, and innovation come from people who are willing to spend long periods alone, following lines of thought that seem strange or useless to everyone around. When you're constantly surrounded by other people, you're constantly influenced by the boundaries of what they consider reasonable, possible, or worthwhile. Even the most supportive, intelligent people in your life still represent limitations on your thinking because their presence automatically engages your social conditioning. But in true solitude, your mind can wander into territories that social thinking would never explore. You can entertain ideas that would seem ridiculous in conversation. You can follow intellectual curiosity into areas that have no immediate practical value. You can spend weeks or months developing understanding that can't be easily explained to others. This is where genius comes from. not from social brainstorming or group collaboration, but from individual minds that have had the time and space to go deeper than collective thinking ever allows. Newton's laws of physics, Einstein's relativity, Darwin's evolution, Schopenhauer's own philosophical insights, all emerged from prolonged periods of solitary thinking. The intelligent person who chooses solitude understands that their best contributions to the world will come from ideas that they develop in private, thoughts that emerge from the depths of sustained individual reflection, insights that could never arise from committee thinking or social consensus. They're not antisocial. They're protecting the conditions that allow for original thinking. They understand that the most valuable thing they can offer other people is ideas that come from beyond the boundaries of what everyone already knows and accepts. This requires tremendous intellectual courage because you're venturing into mental territory where you have no social support, no external validation, no way to know whether you're pursuing something meaningful or wasting your time. But intelligent people who choose solitude have developed tolerance for this uncertainty because they understand it's the price of intellectual originality. Fourth insight. They've mastered what Schopenhauer called the economics of attention, understanding that mental energy is finite and that social interaction, no matter how pleasant, is cognitively expensive in ways that most people never recognize. Every conversation requires you to process not just information, but also social dynamics, emotional states, unspoken agendas, and complex interpersonal mathematics. Intelligent people who choose solitude have calculated the cost of this constant social processing and decided that much of it isn't worth the intellectual energy it requires. They've realized that they have a limited amount of mental bandwidth each day, and they want to spend it on thinking, creating, learning, and developing, rather than on maintaining social relationships that don't add substantial value to their lives. This sounds cold until you realize what they're protecting. Their intellectual energy, their creative capacity, their ability to sustain deep focus. These are the tools they use to contribute something meaningful to the world. And they've recognized that these tools are degraded by too much social engagement. They might maintain a small number of deeply meaningful relationships with people who understand and respect their need for solitude. But they've eliminated the energy drain of casual socializing, networking events, group activities, and social obligations that most people accept as normal parts of life. Schopenhauer himself was famous for this. He would take long daily walks alone, eat most of his meals in solitude, and structure his entire life around protecting his mental energy for philosophical work. People thought he was strange, antisocial, or depressed. But his intellectual output was extraordinary because he had preserved his cognitive resources for what mattered most to him. The intelligent person who chooses solitude has made a strategic decision about how to use their mental energy. They've decided that depth is more valuable than breadth, that quality is more important than quantity, that intellectual achievement is worth more than social popularity. Fifth insight. Schopenhauer understood that people who choose solitude often develop what he called philosophical vision, the ability to see patterns, connections, and truths that are invisible to people caught up in the day-to-day social drama of human life. When you step back from constant social engagement, you begin to see human behavior from a different perspective. You notice how much of what people consider important is actually trivial. You observe how social dynamics repeat the same patterns across different groups and contexts. You begin to understand the psychological mechanisms that drive most human behavior, and this understanding can be both liberating and isolating. Intelligent, solitary people often develop a kind of anthropological perspective on human society. They can see the games people play, the illusions they maintain, the fears and desires that drive most social behavior. This isn't misanthropy, it's clarity. But this clarity comes with a cost, because once you see these patterns, it becomes harder to participate unconsciously in social rituals that you understand are largely meaningless. Schopenhauer wrote extensively about what he called the suffering of existence, the way that most human activity is driven by unconscious desires, fears, and social pressures rather than conscious choice or genuine wisdom. People who choose solitude often do so because they've developed enough philosophical perspective to see through these illusions, and they find it exhausting to constantly pretend that social conventions and cultural priorities matter as much as everyone pretends they do. This doesn't make them superior to others. It makes them different. They've traded social ease for intellectual honesty, popularity for authenticity, the comfort of belonging for the clarity of independent thought. They can still engage with society when necessary or valuable, but they do so from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. They participate in social life as observers and occasional contributors, rather than as people who need social validation to feel complete or worthy. And here we arrive at Schopenhauer's most profound insight about the intelligence of people who choose to be alone. They haven't rejected humanity. They've simply realized that the highest human capacities, creativity, wisdom, original thinking, deep understanding, require conditions that social life rarely provides. Solitude isn't escape from the world. It's preparation for engaging with the world from a place of depth rather than surface, authenticity rather than performance, contribution rather than consumption. Schopenhauer believed that the people who choose solitude are often the ones who have the most to offer humanity, precisely because they've had the time and space to develop insights that emerge only from sustained individual reflection. They're not running away from human connection. They're developing something valuable to bring to human connection when they choose to engage. The truly intelligent person understands that their greatest contributions to others won't come from constant availability or social accommodation. They'll come from the depths of understanding that can only be reached through the patient cultivation of inner life that solitude makes possible. This is why Schopenhauer found people who choose solitude not just intelligent, but terrifyingly so. They've discovered something that threatens the entire social structure that keeps most people trapped in cycles of external validation and intellectual conformity. They've learned that the mind, properly developed in solitude, becomes capable of insights and creations that social thinking could never produce. Your discomfort around people who seem completely content being alone isn't just social conditioning. It's recognition that they've accessed something you haven't. They've developed a relationship with their own consciousness that makes them independent of the social systems that most people depend on for meaning, purpose, and identity. The person who chooses solitude isn't antisocial. They're not running away from connection. They're not damaged or afraid. They've simply discovered that the highest forms of human intelligence require the courage to be profoundly alone with your own mind, and they've decided that this courage is worth developing regardless of how strange it makes them appear to everyone else. This is what makes them terrifyingly intelligent. Not just their capacity for original thinking, but their willingness to pursue that thinking even when it leads them away from social approval and into territories of understanding that most people will never explore. The next time you encounter someone who seems genuinely content to be alone, who doesn't need constant social stimulation, who appears to find something endlessly fascinating in their own inner world, remember Schopenhauer's insight. You might be in the presence of someone who has discovered forms of intelligence that emerge only in solitude, thoughts that arise only in silence, and wisdom that develops only when the mind is free from the constant influence of other minds. They're not running away from intelligence, they're running toward it. And what they discover in that solitude might be exactly what the world needs, even if the world doesn't understand how it was created.